The worst thing that you can do after you break up with someone is to be in their lives. When you ghost someone, you don't give them an opportunity for closure. And when you don't give them an opportunity for closure, that is harmful. So ghosting is painful. Ghosting is bad. If you're worried about breaking up with someone, 50% or more of how traumatized they are has to do with them. And they will say things that will hurt your ego. You're giving up on the relationship, and you can say yes.
Hello, Dr. K. I was wondering if you had any advice on how to break up properly, or with the least amount of drawbacks, because I know that there's no such thing as a perfect one, but I've been in a relationship for 9 months now. It seems to have run its course, and I feel like it's about done for me, but I don't know if she feels like it. And I'm worried that if I do it, it'll be too sudden, or what signals I should show to show that, hey, maybe this is I want to step out of this, but also I don't know what to do for making sure that she doesn't have any adverse effects from it, or I don't have any adverse effects from it, because I don't want this to be a traumatic experience for either of us. But at the same time, I don't really know how to do it without making it extremely hurtful for one of the two of us. And I know we communicate well and everything. It's just very hard, because I feel like once that sentence gets uttered, everything changes, and then communication becomes really difficult. And so I was just sort of wondering if you had any advice.
I love this. I love this. So if we look at the world today, people get traumatized by relationships all the time, right? People have these traumatic breakups. People feel terrible. They snap at you if you try to break up with someone. They're so fucking abusive towards you. They text you all this angry stuff. Sometimes you live rent-free in their head. Sometimes they live rent-free in your head. Sometimes you get broken up with by someone and you can't move past them. You feel scarred. And this brilliant human being has a question. What's the best way to break up? And what blows my mind is that this question is not, the answer to this question is not taught to everybody. Imagine what dating apps would be like if everyone knew the best way to break up with someone. Now, that begs the question, is there a best way to break up with someone? And the answer is yes. There are some breakups that are traumatic and some breakups that are not traumatic, right? So we know that there is a variance. We know that there are ways that can be more harmful and less harmful. That's the first thing we have to establish. Now the question becomes, what is it that makes a breakup traumatic or not traumatic? And this is where we get to something really cool. So for a breakup to be traumatic, there are two fundamental influences. There is, let's say I'm breaking up with you, or let's say you're breaking up with me, because you're in the power position here. So if you're breaking up with Dr. K, there are two things that determine the traumatic nature of this breakup. One is what you say or do, and the second is who I am. This is something we do not talk about enough. Some of y'all may have been unlucky enough or stupid enough to have dated someone who you know will not respond well to a breakup, no matter how you do it. And if we look at the research, which is exactly what we're going to do, let's see what we can discover. Relationships have never been easy. Anytime you interact with someone, you're dealing with their unique soup of emotions, expectations, and even traumatic baggage. And the fact that we're all texting now and dating apps are a thing is not making things easier. That's why we developed a coaching program to help our community with modern relationship problems. Working with a coach can help you build skills like setting boundaries, communicating effectively, and navigating conflict. So if y'all are struggling with your relationships, check out the link in the description below. Factors associated with distress following the breakup of a close relationship. Cool. This has been studied in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships. The variables most highly associated with distress at the time of breakup were non-mutuality in alternatives, i.e. partner having more interest in alternatives, commitment, satisfaction, greater effort in relationship initiation, being left by the other, and fearful attachment style. The variables most highly associated with current distress were commitment, duration of the relationship, fearful attachment style, dismissing attachment style, and time since breakup. So the first thing that I want to point out is that If you're worried about breaking up with someone, 50% or more of how traumatized they are has to do with them, has nothing to do with what you do, right? So if we look at like how painful is a breakup, if you guys have been dating for 6 years, if you've been married for 20 years, if you've been dating for a week, the duration of the relationship determines how potentially painful it is. The second thing is who initiates. Like, that makes sense, right? What's the level of commitment? If you're more invested than the other person is, then that will cause suffering. But this is where I want y'all to think a little bit carefully about this. Because who is responsible for a certain level of investment in a relationship? If you are more invested in the relationship than I am, is that my fault? So this is where it's so interesting, right? Because a lot of people who get dumped will demonize their partner. And they'll be like, oh my God, my partner is such an asshole, such an asshole, such an asshole. But your response to a breakup has a lot to do with you, has a lot to do with your perception of alternatives. Is this the only person that is available for you for the rest of your life? Then it's going to hurt more. Do you have an anxious attachment style? Do you have a dismissive attachment style? So the first thing to understand is a lot of the hurt on their end is going to be based on them and has nothing to do with you. Now, that doesn't mean that you can go be an asshole, but let's look at another paper. The Breakup of Romantic Relationships, Situational Predictors of Perception of Recovery. So now this paper is looking at bouncing back, okay? We examined a range of predictors that might influence the speed with which people recover emotionally from the breakup of a romantic relationship, focusing specifically on concrete situational variables, including initiator status, presence of social support, length of relationship, amount of time couple typically spent together day to day, how much in love participants were, how soon they began dating again, how many previous relationships they had, how often they saw their ex after breakup. The results showed that relationship length and how quickly the individual began dating someone new were predictors of recovery from the breakup of a romantic relationship. Okay? This variable also matters based on other studies. Hold on. Presence of social support is really important. How much time they spent together is also important according to other studies. So this is also where, like, basically how much a breakup hurts or not depends a lot on how long y'all have been dating. Right? So you can let them down soft, you can let them down easy, you can let them down, you can be an asshole. That's going to have an effect. We're going to get to what you can do in a second. But the first thing that I want y'all to understand is that there are a lot of factors that if you're breaking up with someone are out of your control. What is their attachment style? What is their support structure? How long have y'all been dating? Arguably, you have some control over that. Right? But this is where my point is that if you're paranoid about not wanting to hurt your partner, that's good. And also, don't for a moment, because when I hear this person ask this question, I do not hear the acknowledgement that this person being traumatized by the breakup has a lot more to do, has a lot of variables that have nothing to do with what I say or do. What's their attachment style? What's their social support structure? How long are they going to start? How long before they start dating again? These are the factors that predict recovery. And for those of y'all that are trying to figure out, how do I recover from a breakup? The converse is also true. What's your social support structure? How quickly before you start dating again? What's your attachment style, right? These are the things that will determine how quickly you bounce back. Now the question becomes, what are the factors that you can control? So this is what I find is really helpful, and the data supports this as well. So the first is that it shouldn't be completely sudden. You should signal to them in some way that the breakup is going to happen. You should signal your dissatisfaction with them. And this is really important for a relationship. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make in relationships is when we are unsatisfied, we do not communicate that to our partners. So if you are unhappy in the relationship, you should vocalize your unhappiness in a limited and focused fashion. So you don't want to be complaining every single day about, I'm unhappy about this, I'm unhappy about this, I'm unhappy about this. So you should communicate in a way that is designed to help the relationship. I don't want you to vent. I want you to think through why you are unhappy. Then think about what of this is your responsibility. Then think about what of this is their responsibility. Think about why the unhappiness matters to you, right? So I'm unhappy because you spend too much time with your friends. That's a behavior. So this is where what we want to do is take the behavior that you may be unhappy about in the relationship and tie it back to yourself. I feel unhappy about this thing that you're doing. You spend too much time with your friends. The reason that makes me unhappy because of how it affects me. I want to be spending more time with you. That's why this thing matters to me. So tie the behavior to the impact on you. Spend some time thinking through it and then present what you are going to say in a relatively concise manner. Okay, that's how you just express dissatisfaction. Hey, this thing that you're doing bothers me. It bothers me when you drink alcohol. I do want you to stop drinking alcohol, so I think it's important to be honest. But the reason that I want you to stop drinking alcohol, there are a couple of reasons. The first is that I don't like the person that I started to date was the sober you. That's the person I fell in love with. That's the person that I have a relationship with. When you drink alcohol, you turn into a different person. You become more demanding. You become more aggressive. I think your behavior negatively impacts our relationships as a couple. You kind of become grabby, right? And like that bothers me. I want to be able to maintain healthy relationships. I feel like I have to apologize for your behavior after we go out, right? So you should be clear about the behavior, how it affects you, what really bothers you about it. That's not easy to do. But that will help with a breakup because then they will see it coming in some sense. Second thing that's really important to understand, the intensity of emotional reaction by your partner is usually inversely correlated, maybe not, but there's some evidence of this. This sounds crazy that I'm about to say it. I don't believe it myself. Is inversely correlated with how traumatized they are. So people who stay traumatized and get messed up by a breakup are the people who are brooding, ruminative, quiet, then it lingers for years. They will never recover. People who are explosive after a breakup are actually more likely to move on. And there's data, I can pull up a paper, PTSD and social phobia, natural recovery from trauma. Okay, so identified 3 factors that are associated with both natural recovery from trauma and reduction of PTSD severity via exposure therapy. So dissociative symptoms such as feelings of derealization and depersonalization during or following a trauma or amnesia for information related to the trauma have been conceptualized as strategies that reduce emotional engagement in order to avoid trauma-related emotions. What this basically means is when we dissociate, we are avoiding engaging with our emotions. And dissociation is correlated with bad trauma, okay? Similarly, a delay in the peak reaction to the traumatic event may also be seen as an initial interference in emotional engagement and thus is expected to hinder emotional processing and natural recovery. Consistent with this hypothesis, individuals whose peak symptom severity occurred within 2 weeks of the traumatic event were less symptomatic 14 weeks later than were individuals whose symptoms peaked between 2 and 6 weeks after the event. So what does this mean? This means that when you experience a lot of intense emotions up front, that actually decreases the likelihood of trauma down the road. Intensity of emotions now reduces emotions over time. So if your partner gets really, really pissed at you, I'm not saying that you should make them pissed at you. I'm not saying you should be mean, but if you're concerned about traumatizing them, if they get really angry or express a lot of emotion or a lot of intense sadness, that's actually healthy. They're not depersonalizing. They're not derealizing. They're not dissociating. It's okay for people to be really upset when you break up with them. That's actually healthy. It's okay for you to be really, really upset when someone breaks up with you. That is also healthy. So this is where sometimes I think what we do is we try to reduce the emotions of our partner. And in doing so, we're not actually doing them favors. So I'm not saying be an asshole, right? So if you're mean to them, that has its own injurious capability, right? So if I'm mean to you, that is an injury that is separate from your emotions. But don't avoid like high emotions when you break up with someone, okay? It's okay to say the way that you feel. Next thing that's really important is don't be friends afterward, generally speaking. So more sustained contact post-breakup seems to correlate with worsening outcomes. So you can be friends with them 6 months later. That's totally fine. Y'all can stay friends. But generally speaking, the worst thing that you can do after you break up with someone is to be in their lives. And this is what feels so toxic. So I sometimes I'll work with people who feel like they can't break up with someone because they're also their source of emotional support or also their roommate. That's when things get really toxic really fast. Not all the time, but it's a risk factor. Y'all understand? We're talking probabilistically. So generally speaking, what you want to do is it's hard for people to move on, especially when you break up with them, if you hang out with them. And this is where you got to be really careful because you may feel guilty. And since you want to assuage your own guilt, you're going to be kind to them. You're going to cook for them. You're going to clean for them. It probably doesn't help them over time, right? So you basically, like a Band-Aid, you want to sort of rip it off. You want to vocalize your unhappiness in the relationship. You don't have to if you want to break up with them now, don't start complaining about shit, because then you have the foundation to break up with them in 3 months. That's dishonest. Don't do that. But generally speaking, if you're not enjoying a relationship, you should vocalize that as you go down the road and don't spend time with them afterward. The last thing that helps a lot is closure. So I think the best thing to do is to vocalize the way that you feel and then give them the opportunity to respond, give them the opportunity to ask questions, give them the opportunity to listen to their feelings and even be validating is wonderful. So what doesn't help people, and there's studies on ghosting that basically show this, when you ghost someone, you don't give them an opportunity for closure. And when you don't give them an opportunity for closure, that is harmful. So ghosting is painful, but ghosting is bad. So when you break up with someone, what I would recommend to this person, what I would recommend. If you're trying to break up with someone and you don't know what to say, pretend you were leaving Dr. K a voicemail that is 2 minutes long, exactly like this person said. And then that will be your nuggets. So then in the case of this person, you're going to go to this person, you're going to say, hey, we've been dating for 9 months. I really think you're a wonderful person. I feel like the relationship has run its course. Right? Be a little bit more clear about that. I feel like, we were hanging out for a while and things are fun, but the relationship doesn't seem to be growing in a way that I'm looking for. It feels like, if anything, we're kind of petering out. That's how I feel about it. I'm not so sure that I want to stay in this relationship at this point. And it's not that you did anything wrong or anything like that. That's just kind of how I feel about things right now. How do you feel? And if they say something like, are you breaking up with me? Then you can say, that's sort of where I'm leaning right now, but I'm open to having a conversation about it, right? And this is also where and I know I'm sort of saying if you're sure you want to break up with them, then say that. But this is where things get a little bit tricky, because a relationship that feels like it's run its course may not actually be over. That's a feeling that could be worked on. So I'm not saying that if you feel that way, you need to work on it, but the whole point of a healthy relationship is that it involves dialogue, right? This is how I feel about it. How do you feel about it? You may be surprised. They may say yeah, I feel like I've been putting in a lot of effort and things are not moving in the right direction. Maybe we can amicably part ways. Maybe they're saying, yeah, I'm sorry that the relationship feels like it hasn't run its course. I really don't feel that way at all. I feel like we're on the cusp of something, and I feel like there's something that's getting in the way of us moving the relationship to the next level. And I'd like to talk to you about that. And I'd encourage you to keep an open mind. But if you've made up your mind, then don't fuck around with it. Just be yeah, I'm not interested in this relationship anymore. I feel like it's run its course. I'm not really interested in problem solving or working on it or anything like that. You can say that. So you're giving up on this relationship, and you can say yes. So this is the other cool tip. When you're breaking up with someone, they will think in a very black and white way. And they will say things that will hurt your ego. You're giving up on the relationship, and you can say yes. Don't fall into the ego trap of, no, I'm not giving up. You're giving up. No, I'm not giving up. You're just feeling like I'm giving up, right? And you can reframe things your way if you want. You can say I guess you could say that. I feel like the relationship is has run its course. That's the way that I would put it. If you're hearing that I'm giving up on it, okay. Because oftentimes when people are trying to trick you, they'll make some ego statement, right? And then does that make sense? They're trying to trap you in a corner. And if you accept their premise and argue against it, you're just going to get trapped. And you can say I guess so. That's not the way that I see it. I feel like it's really run its course and it's not worth pursuing. So if you want to call that giving up, sure. I can see why you would see it that way. Do you have any thoughts? Do you have any questions? How are you feeling about this stuff? And then if they kind of explode in your face, I think you can offer them a conversation later, and you can say, look, if you want to talk again in a week or two and you need closure or something, I'm more than happy to try to provide that. But I think basically it's over. I feel like it's over. The other thing that is a little bit tricky is if they ask you for feedback, I would give it. So this is another one of those things where it hurts a lot to hear and will create a strong emotional response, but will probably help that person over time. And I think it's okay to provide some general reasons, but I would not go into you do this wrong, you do this wrong, you do this wrong, unless they ask for it. And that's also where they say, did I do anything wrong? And you can ask them, well, like, what kind of answer are you looking for? Do you want like a 5-minute answer, an hour-long answer? Like, what are you looking for? Here are the major things that did not work for me in this relationship. And some of those things I think you should be clear about. Sometimes this doesn't work for me, and sometimes this is bad. You know, there's a difference between sometimes you drink a little bit too much, and I really think your alcohol is a huge problem. Now, the other thing that I would say is for you to be really careful about, like I said, kind of staying attached. So be careful about conditionals. If they say, if I do this, if I do this, if I do this, will you give me another chance? I generally speaking say that that's not a great idea. But the other thing that I have to say about relationships is that following the best advice is usually a way to end up in bad relationships. And oftentimes the best relationships come from doing stupid things. That's my clinical experience, that most of the happy relationships, mine included, have red flags at the beginning because most people are not perfect. And not only not perfect, most people have some pretty fundamental fuck-ups in their personality structure, in their life, and that a lot of tolerance and patience around those can be an incredibly strong foundation, right? So it's like moderation in all things, including moderation. So I love this question, and I do think that there are very concrete ways to break up with someone in the right way. Okay. This is good. So there are a couple of questions about love. Do you have to feel like you're in love all the time? What if they tell you they still love you? So let's talk about love in relationships for a moment. So them loving you is not necessarily a sufficient reason to stay in a relationship. And I don't think love conquers all, but it certainly is worth a lot. Like I would say love accounts for 51% of a relationship. Like I believe in love. I think it's great. But I think that love, the problem is when love becomes a substitute for the rest of it. When people start using love as a substitute for becoming a better person, becoming more emotionally available, becoming financially independent, helping out around the house, changing diapers, that's when it becomes a problem. Love cannot replace anything else that a healthy relationship requires. But if you have all of the checkboxes of a healthy relationship and you don't have love, I think that's not going to be ideal. There are definitely cases of people growing into a different kind of love. And I think this is the other thing about love is that we use the word love as one word, but there are several kinds of love. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make is that we don't cultivate the scenarios that create the feeling of love. So if we think about love as a neurological reaction in our brain, that reaction requires usually a certain set of an environment. So I think love and libido requires energy. When I work with patients who have dead bedroom syndrome, oftentimes there's fundamental things about their life that have changed. They're working too much. Their spouse is working too much. They have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old at home. They have a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old at home. And there's just no space for love. Love requires space to grow, right? Love requires a certain amount of emptiness between two people. Love happens in the quiet moments. This is also why erotic transference is such a thing. So if you work with a therapist or psychiatrist, if you are a psychiatrist or therapist, erotic transference is incredibly common. It is the sexual or loving feeling like you're falling in love with your therapist. And let's think about the circumstances of that, right? Why do you feel like you're falling in love with your therapist? It's because there is a space between the two of you. There's a certain amount of vulnerability. There's a certain amount of connection. There's a certain amount of not the humdrum of everyday life. It's not picking things up from the grocery store and getting air added to your tires and dropping this package off at the Amazon return center. There's a certain amount of just space for the two of you to coexist. This is also why we catch feelings. So who do you catch feelings for? You catch feelings for people who there is a space between the two of you. And what I mean by that is a negative space that gets filled in with this kind of feeling of love. And the person that you catch feelings for, the reason they don't catch feelings back is because their space is not the same as your space. You have an opening in your heart that some human being can step into. That's erotic transference. But their heart may not have that space. They may be crushing on someone else. It may be occupied by someone else. That's why you end up in the friend zone. The friend zone is simply erotic transference. That's one way to look at it, right? When you have an erotic transference towards your psychiatrist or therapist, they may not feel the same way about you. Kind of the same thing, catching feelings. So I think love is really important. I think it's critically important. The biggest mistake that people make is that they think that it can substitute for the other stuff. Love doesn't put food on the table. Sacrifice, effort, working hard, getting up at 6 a.m., that's what can put food on the table. And this is so confusing for a lot of people because when they feel like they're in love, they feel like that should be enough. It's not enough. Now, if the love is the fuel for you to do all of the other things, like that's what I feel in my relationship, that my love is my primary source of energy to get my shit in order, to become a better human being than I was yesterday because I love my wife, because I love my kids. So I strive to be better, and love is the fuel, but it's not a substitute for the action. Right? That means preparing a D&D adventure instead of playing a game of Dota. That means going to the grocery store. I do this once every 2 weeks. I've been doing it less nowadays, but I used to do this thing where once every week I would just go to the grocery store at 10 o'clock because we had to get groceries. And the rest of our week would be better, right? And that's something that you pay for with sweat, that you don't want to go to the grocery store at 10 p.m., but the rest of the week is better. Those small sacrifices are what really sustains a relationship, not the love itself. Love without meaningful action is just an indulgence. And then the emotion of love, right, that neurochemical reaction of feeling in love comes and goes. And I think when it's gone for too long, that's when you have a problem. Hey y'all, hope you enjoyed today's video. We talk about a bunch of topics like this on the channel, so be sure to subscribe for more. If you're already subscribed, GG, and we'll see you in chat.